Welcome back to Marketing Champions on Daily Ad Brief. I'm your host, Mike White, and on Marketing Champions, we are talking to experts in the industry, talking about the pros, the cons, all the tips and tricks, and everything that they do to help businesses grow. Join us today from Sarasota, Florida. We have Heather Osgood with True Native Media. Heather, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be here.
So tell me about what you guys do and the customers that you work with.
Yeah, so True Native Media is a podcast representation firm. So we work with about 70 different podcasts, and our role is to connect them with advertisers. We also work with advertisers to try and help create really powerful podcast advertising campaigns.
What are the benefits that an advertising firm has or a company on advertising throughout a podcast network?
Podcast advertising is really different than a lot of different forms of advertising. And I don't think that it gets thought of as influencer marketing quite often enough. So we really try to help educate people within the advertising space that podcast advertising really should be thought of as influencer marketing. When we look at host-read endorsement ads, which the bulk of the ads in this space are still those host-read endorsement ads, there's a ton of power that goes behind a campaign that's based in having that host try out the product and then really speak from their experience and in their own voice about a product or a service to that very dedicated audience. And so really what we're trying to do is create powerful campaigns for advertisers, often many times who haven't even considered podcast advertising or thought about the power of really leveraging that influencer piece of it.
What's the biggest change that you see coming up over the next 24 months in the way that companies market their products or services?
I do believe that privacy is really just a huge issue. Obviously, all the changes that we've seen made with the iOS system and how that has really just impacted, especially social media ads and our ability to kind of leverage and target those. In podcast advertising, we've seen a lot of spillover from companies who maybe aren't getting the traction that they had once been getting from social media advertising. They're coming into the podcast space and trying to really leverage that. But we are seeing in the podcast space, just as all the other, industries, that privacy and data collection really is kind of at the forefront. So our challenge is how do we really provide that in-depth information and feedback to the advertisers that they're looking for while still really protecting the customer's data and their privacy. And so I really do believe that privacy element is just going to continue to be an important piece and could, very well change the whole, advertising landscape.
What's the biggest mistake that you see newbies having when they come into the space? Something that you've seen over and over again with your experience?
My experience is that because podcast advertising can be very matchy-matchy, so meaning let's say you are a supplement company, you might say, oh, well, we're just going to advertise on health shows. What I see is that often advertisers try to get too specific in the types of shows that they want to advertise on. Of course, that's not to say that you shouldn't advertise on a health show if you're a health product, but we really need to look at the target audience that you're wanting to reach and target them where they're at. So that might mean health shows. That also might mean a comedy show or a lifestyle show, an entertainment show. It really should be based on the target market that you're trying to reach. And then secondarily, making sure that you're getting enough reach to actually see the impact that podcasts have and giving that podcast campaign the time that it needs to really perform, because often podcast advertising is a slower moving medium than other forms of advertising.
So to get an ROI, what's the average cost, whether it's, is it the number of followers a podcast has? How does that work? If someone has 1,000 followers, how much would it cost me to advertise with that podcast on average?
So the podcast advertising industry is, I would say, heavily based on a CPM model. I would say the average CPM right now goes from $20 to $30. It can be as low as 15. It can be higher depending on how targeted you are. If you're looking to advertise on a show that has just 1,000 downloads, chances are they're probably not going to be using a CPM model because that audience is so small. My advice really would be to pick a show that has about 10,000 plus downloads per episode in a 30-day period, because really that's where you're going to be able to see traction. And so in terms of costs, of course, that should be around that $300 range for an ad. But it really does depend on the audience size, and it should be based on that CPM model.
Excellent. Well, Heather, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your insights. We appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
To find out more about True Native Media, visit us at dailyadbrief.com. We'll see you next time on Marketing Champions.